Russian troops are stepping up their offensive in Ukraine's industrial heartland, slowly but steadily seizing ground with overwhelming firepower and bloody tactics that are taking a heavy toll on Ukraine's defenders. As the conflict becomes a war of attrition, Ukraine continues to call for additional supplies of the heavy weapons that could help it hold off the invaders. Can and will Europe and Germany deliver? Today we're asking, Russian offensive, is the tide turning in Putin's favor? Hello and welcome to the Point. It is a pleasure to introduce our guests, beginning with Lotta Lundberg. She's a Swedish author and journalist who writes a regular column for the renowned Swedish daily Svenska Dagbladet. And Christoph von Marschall is a returning guest. Great to have you back. He's diplomatic correspondent for the Berlin newspaper Der Tagesspiegel. And joining us from Bonn is my Ukrainian colleague, Roman Goncharenko, who works with DW's Russian language service. And Roman, if I may, I'd like to start right away with a question about how you assess the current situation in Donbas. In fact, Russian forces are pressing forward house by house, village by village. How bad are the losses they are inflicting?
Well, what we are seeing now is probably the most difficult part of this war for the last 100 years, or 100 days, so since February when Russia openly attacked Ukraine. Russia is gaining ground slowly, but it's gaining ground, and it's because Russia changed its tactics. So it's now pressing in one in one direction on a very relatively small piece of land. It's a concentrated strike, and you have to understand it's a place where Ukraine had 8 years to build its lines to prepare for this war. That is why when the war started in February, Russians were not moving at all, or moving very, very slowly there. So they had no success there. Now they have some success, and it could be a Russian momentum. But still, it's too early to tell if we will see a major offensive and a fast moving forward of Russian forces in the coming weeks. But the situation is extremely dangerous, I would say.
And how bad are the casualties?
Well, we do not have reliable information about the casualties. It was unusual to hear the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky talking about 50 to 100 Ukrainian soldiers being killed every day. I think the actual figure might be higher on some days. So it's a very huge loss. And you have to understand, Ukraine doesn't have as much military as Russia. So the human dimension of this war is very, very dangerous for Ukraine. So Ukraine is losing its best trained soldiers, and if there is no quick help from the West, I mean, with weapons deliveries, heavy weapons, anti-tank weapons, and all other weapons, it will be very difficult for Ukraine to hold that eastern Ukrainian region, industrial heartland, as you said.
And we will come to weapons deliveries in just a moment. But let me go to Lotta. Your defense minister, the Swedish defense minister, spoke to our colleagues in DW News yesterday and told them that the Russian invasion has changed the security situation in Europe as a whole quite drastically. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. That's why we have sent in the application for membership in NATO, which has made us schizophrenic in a way, because 3 months ago, the same Minister of Defence said, I would never, over my dead body, I would enter the NATO. And now we've realised how dangerous it must be, because he changed his mind, and he's not the kind of guy who would just kind of, he's not a populist. This is dangerous, and this had to go very fast.
And I want to come back a little bit later to how public opinion sees that. But let me first ask you, Christoph, Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia has called Donbas absolutely key for Russia's strategic goals. Why is that? What is so important about this region in the East? And do you expect that its fall could be imminent?
Well, Russians a little bit changed their goals for the war. At the beginning, it was they want to change the government in Kiev. They wanted to occupy most of Ukraine. They failed. So now it's a new definition what could also constitute success or victory. And that is a certain change. The Donbas is very important because you have the Russian-speaking minority, majority, however you put it. And a part of the Donbas is already occupied since 2014. So they just want to enlarge this piece of land. And that makes it very difficult for Ukrainian forces because the Russians are now concentrating on what they have on this smaller region. And the Ukrainians, and that is a little bit now the fault of the West as well. This was predictable that it would come to the situation that the Ukrainian forces would need very quickly more heavy weapon. They are on the way, but if the West would have started to deliver that sooner, they would be in a better situation. I'm not the big military strategist. I can only tell you what I hear from military strategists in Germany and the US, what they are telling to me. And the optimistic picture is that the tide might turn in the next 2-3 weeks when the heavy weapons which the West delivers are in place and the Ukrainian soldiers are trained on it. And so we would see a better situation for Ukraine in July or early August. But the losses are very heavy, and they have to come over this period of the next 2, 3, 4 weeks without giving away too much ground, because that's the other side. If the Russians get more ground and have the time to establish more defense structures over there, then it will be very hard to get that back. It's easier if you keep the situation flowing, and then Ukraine might be successful in holding and also regaining territory.
And we're going to take a look at the defense effort in just a moment.
Maybe
but Roman,
just two
yes,
short
please.
remarks, if I may.
Yeah.
Two short remarks. I slightly disagree with Russian aims. I think that the aim to replace the government, to change the Ukrainian government, and to occupy as much of Ukraine as possible is still Russian aim. Russia is just put that aside and said, okay, we can wait. It's a war of attrition now, and it will be months. And Russia says we have bigger resources, we can do it. And the second thing is the Western weapons are coming, that is correct, but Russia is also attacking Ukrainian trains delivering those weapons, and we do not know, we don't have reliable information how much is lost on the way and is not coming where it should come, I mean in the east where the fighting is now. And this is also a problem because Ukraine has very great difficulties, I would say, in delivering fast weapons. It is a huge country. It's a very long distance, and Russia has a lot of enough time to attack.
Roman, just very briefly, why is Donbas so important to Russia? Is it that famous land bridge, the connection to the Crimea? Is it to Crimea? Is it the gas reserves that are in the eastern region? What is it that makes this their key focus at the moment?
I do not think that Donbas is more important than north, where Kiev, the capital, is, or east, where Crimea is, and Russia was worried about supplying Crimea with water from the Ukrainian river Dnipro. So it is all important. Maybe Russia thought that in Donbas we can sell it as a victory battle because we've announced at the beginning of the war that we will liberate those territories. And not having success there was kind of a propaganda problem. Maybe this is the reason. Or they thought if we strike there, we do a concentrated strike and we move forward, and then it will be easier for us to go further, because this is where the most best trained Ukrainian troops are concentrated, in the east, in Donbas. Striking there and maybe trying to encircle them, this is what Russian aim is. And then it will be easier for them to move in other directions.
Now, thank you very much. Now, let us take a look at those weapons deliveries that have been mentioned several times. Despite frequent pledges of support for Ukraine, Germany has faced criticism both at home and abroad for doing too little, too late. Now, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is promising to send Ukraine a modern air defense system, but will it get there in time?
With heavy firepower and concentration of its troops, the Russian army has recently been making significant gains in terrain in the Donbas. Ukraine has little to counter this overwhelming superiority of 11-1 at the moment. One reason? The lack of heavy weapon deliveries by Germany and its allies. Heavy weapons like the already promised Gepard tank or the Haubitze 2000, nowhere to be seen. For its hesitant attitude, the German government is therefore being criticized at home and abroad on a regular basis. That is not prudence, that is hesitation, that is dithering, that is timidity. A defensive mode from the German chancellor. In the Bundestag, he promises more deliveries. In the coming weeks, we will also deliver more weapons. The German government has just decided to supply the Ukraine with the IRIS-T system, the most advanced air defense system Germany has. Germany has, however, already promised a lot, but is it enough, and will it really arrive?
And let me put that question straight to Christoph. And after that announcement by Chancellor Scholz, the Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, said it could take some months for this surface-to-air system to get to Ukraine.
Yeah, so Germany is a little bit acting too little, too late. I think that's fair criticism. One could also look at it from a different perspective. Other big European countries are not doing much more. Take France or Italy, and they are not on the spot. Germany is on the spot because it is a country everybody is looking to for leadership in Europe. And so I think Germany should be criticized for it, and also just announcing that they will send additional things today. That is certainly a reaction of Chancellor Scholz. He feels the criticism and has to react to it. But the real test is whether it arrives and when it arrives. So these questions are really important. I think there are two lines where Scholz is moving, but very slowly, because he's a very risk-averse politician. And what might be helpful today might be wrong in 3 months from now for the support of the population. So he makes two lines. First of all, his party, the Social Democrats, are much more comfortable if they can say, well, we deliver defensive weapons, not weapons for attack. So, for example, heavy tanks like the Leopard, they don't want to deliver, although it would help. And the second line generally is, yes, Ukraine should defend itself. It should not lose the war. Russia should not win the war. But there is this cautious assessment, but we shouldn't give Ukraine weapons with which they could attack Russian territory. And that is something President Biden of the US is also making.
I want to come back to that in just a moment. But let me ask Lotte to give us an outside perspective, because I know you have been watching Germany for a long time now and reporting on it. So in his historic speech on February 27th, right after this invasion began, Chancellor Scholz called it a turning point. And many people who heard that speech felt that we were perhaps finally seeing Germany move into a readiness to play a leadership role in Europe, in common and security and foreign policy, but also beyond that, to finally punch at its weight, as it were. Do you think it has followed through? Is it walking the talk?
No. I think that the Germans are identifying with the projections that they have been had at them since the Second World War. And they are really good at identifying with being the bad guy. They really are tormenting themselves with things that happened 70 years ago. And therefore, there is this talk about no more war on German grounds, nie mehr allein sein, and all of this. And this is holding the Germans back. There is also a, I would say, rather negativity towards the Americans in Germany. And the Germans do identify with Moscow. And SPD the Social Democrats are very torn. And even in Sweden, we can watch this and see that he's not clear. And I mean, he was now yesterday, but it's still not very German, because the Germans should be acting on, what they say, and they always have. So
it was clear, and yet 2/3 of the speech were devoted to domestic economic issues and social solidarity, which was quite
why does he hesitate? That's the big question. Even in Sweden, we're waiting for him.
Let's ask Roman why he thinks Chancellor Scholz hesitates, because you two have been observing German politics and foreign policy for a long time. Do you think this is his personal leadership style, that restrained northern German approach, or is it the legacy of the Social Democratic Party and those ties to Moscow and Ostpolitik that Lotte just mentioned? Or is it perhaps that he's been essentially intimidated by Putin's scare tactics?
I think it's all of those things, and I would add one more. I think it's also a fear that Russia could cut off gas supplies suddenly and German economy would suffer. I think this is also something that he has in mind when he's hesitant in making a decision and deliver heavy weapons to Ukraine soon enough. So I think, yes, of course, there is a legacy of his party, the Social Democrats. There is a very strong pacifist movement in Germany as a country, not just among people who vote for SPD, but among other parts of the country. So there are very strong ties to Russia in Eastern Germany, and all those people are very skeptical about weapons deliveries. So the society is split, I would say. We have, and this is what polls are also showing. We have some 40% in favor of delivering of heavy weapons, and like 37 or 38, I think, against it. So this is something that Scholz also is considering. But he will have to decide, and I think he's moving in that direction, but moving slowly.
Christoph, do you think the Chancellor is right to be cautious, to be fearful that a stronger German, a more proactive approach could, in fact, precipitate World War III, as he actually himself has said?
Personally, in the military field, I think he's too cautious. It's a different thing with economy and sanctions. So I would here give a split answer. From my point of view, Russians are much more afraid of NATO, whether it's conventional weapons, whether it's nuclear weapons, than we should be afraid of Russian weapons. In the long run, the West, the EU, plus the US, has an economic resources which are 15 times to 20 times as big as Russia's economic resources. So if this is a war of attrition, if it lasts long, then it's, from my point of view, no question who will win, as long as there is the political determination to support Ukraine, as long as they want to fight and give them what they need. But Germans are afraid of this nuclear thing. We just have to remind ourselves, we were at the front lines, East Germans and West Germans, for almost half a century. And if there had happened a nuclear war, it would be on the territory of Germany. And that has an influence on our thinking. Where I think Scholz is wise not to push economic sanctions too far, because I think we all have to understand that sanctions should be painful for the enemy much more than to your own economy. Otherwise, you might lose over the midterm range the support of your voters, and that is a real danger.
And I want to take a look at sanctions in just a moment. But Lotte, do you see similar divisions in public opinion within Sweden? The Economist recently wrote about Western attitudes as a whole as this conflict becomes a war of attrition, and said it's seeing the emergence of a peace camp on the one hand and a justice camp on the other. The justice camp being those who say that Putin's breach of international law cannot be permitted to stand. Would you say there's a similar division of attitude in your own country?
Absolutely, yeah. On the other hand, Sweden always wants to be the best in the class. So now we've decided to join NATO. And Erdogan is kind of stopping us, but that has just united us even more. Before Erdogan's talk about us letting the terrorists walk the streets and, you know, that he didn't put his veto into this, it was more torn. While now we have gathered behind the idea that we have to deliver. Sweden is one of the largest country that delivers the most, the number one country per capita who delivers the most weapons. And Yeah, the discussion is there, of course,
But you are moving ahead with NATO membership, and that is quite a big turning point for Sweden. Let me just go back to Roman very quickly, if you would. Roman, the U.S. is also now promising to supply sophisticated surface-to-air weapon systems. They also, though, have extracted a pledge from the Ukrainian government that these will not be used to fire onto Russian territory. That was actually mentioned by Christoph earlier. Number one, will that pledge, do you think, be respected? Is it, in fact, requiring Ukraine to fight with one hand behind its back? And number two, will this pledge be enough to placate Russia?
Well, I think Ukraine is not interested in using those weapons on the Russian territory. Ukraine was very, or at least that was my impression, was very restrained in attacking Russian territory. We do not have reliable information about that. There were some explosions in the not far from the border of oil refineries and things like that, but that was it. So Ukraine did not attack territories like further deeper into Russian state. So Crimea was not really attacked. And now Ukraine is not in a position even to attack Russian territory, even with those weapons that will be delivered next, those multiple rocket launchers. They only have a relatively short range, or medium range, I would say. And I do not think Ukraine has an interest. And Russia has signaled very clear. If Ukraine does that, we have all options on the table, including nuclear. So I don't think Ukraine will risk that.
Thank you very much. Let's take a quick look at the issue of sanctions. And in fact, the European Union has now agreed on its 6th package of sanctions, but getting to yes wasn't easy.
Oil pumped from Russian fields is no longer welcome in most parts of the EU. EU leaders in Brussels reached an unexpected breakthrough on the 6th sanctions package just around midnight on Monday night.
These sanctions are biting hard and are really destroying, and that's the goal, the basis, the financial basis of Putin leading this war, and hitting hard the Russian economy.
But the embargo only applies to oil imports by ship, a compromise to keep Hungary on board. The country will continue to receive Russian oil through the so-called Druzhba pipeline for the time being. The sanctions also exclude Russia's largest bank from SWIFT, bans 3 further Russian state broadcasters, and sanctions those responsible for war crimes. But how effective is this 6th sanctions package?
Let me put that question straight away to Christoph, but coupled with the observation that this exception for the Druzhba pipeline doesn't only affect Hungary, also Poland and Germany get oil via this pipeline. So if they were so serious about Western unity, shouldn't they actually be foregoing that oil now?
Yeah, but they don't want to do that. I mean, Poland and Germany made their deals that are preparing to phase out over the next half year. They want to get there until January of next year, and just gives a timeline in comparison that we don't know how long the war lasts. So Hungary was not the only guy or the only country in the room which would have problems with an oil embargo just right now. Also Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, and so on and so on. But we should blame Hungary for not being willing to find a compromise, to play only on its own interests. And here I think the EU has to think about to which degree the importance we give to unity isn't overrated. I think in this case, we should sometimes tell countries, you know, we can do consensus -1. Then it's a strong signal of 26 countries. And every time the issue is mentioned, Hungary would be blamed for not trying to join the EU. So more political pressure by EU -1 might be a good tool.
Yes, and in fact there are calls to drop majority to consensus voting, but that would be a whole show in itself, so we won't go there. Lotte, when you look at the state of this much vaunted Western unity, are you concerned that it could shatter going forward?
I didn't get the question now. What shattered?
The Western unity, this united front that the West has celebrated, and rightfully so, in the beginning of the war.
Well, that's definitely one of Putin's goals. that we implode or that we depart from one another. So we just have to be aware that that must never happen, because the war against the Ukraine is not a war just against the Ukraine. It's a war against Western values. It's an imperialistic war, and if we don't get that, we are in serious trouble.
Let me take us all back to the title of this program, and we asked essentially whether the tide is turning in Putin's favor. Roman, how do you see it? Oh, we're not hearing you?
It's a short...
There. Go ahead.
The tide could be turning for Putin, but it is short-term perspective. In the medium term and in the long term, I think Putin will lose, definitely.
Christoph?
Same feeling that I think the tide is just for the moment turning, but not in the long run. The West will win if they are committed to support Ukraine.
Lotte?
We have to deliver. We have to deliver now.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you very much for being with us, and thank you also to our audience for tuning in. See you soon.